My name is Heidi Siefkas, and I am an author, a TEDx speaker, and most importantly to you all, the fun CEO. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. 1, 2. Cha-cha-cha. 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 Guantanamera. Wahira Guantanamera. Guantanamera. Wahira Guantanamera. And that CEO stands for Cuba Experience Officer. So there's no hiring and firing. I'm not going to be steering the ship either. I'll leave that up to the captain, okay? But if you have a question about Cuban coffee, rum, cigars, how we can legally travel to Cuba, my recommendations for places to eat, things to do, I'm your woman, all right? So now, you guys came here to learn a little bit about what you should do, what you shouldn't do, Cuba 101, okay? And I'm gonna give it to you in very simple points and anecdotes. Remember, if you have a question after this, we'll do a Q&A, as well as if you see me with a hat, you just say, hola, hola, que bola. So, whether you're celebrating a wedding anniversary, your birthday, or just a late spring break, I bet we can all agree that we're going to Cuba because we want to get to Cuba before it changes, before it's Americanized, maybe before there's a McDonald's or a Diamonds International, or maybe a Mojitoville. But I'm going to shock you guys with the first truth. It has been Americanized already. Shoot. McDonald's beat myself, also beat Jay-Z, Beyonce, Madonna, the Rolling Stones, President Obama. But the caveat is, this is at the U.S. Naval Base, Guantanamo, in the eastern part of Cuba. So do Cubans know what those addictive fries taste like? What the special sauce is? Absolutely not. And are you going to see a Mickey D's in Cuba, in Old Havana's port? Absolutely not. And the reason is because there's this thing called the U.S. embargo in place. But believe you me, you're going to see some type of Americanization that is the 1950s classic cars. You're also going to see magnificent architecture that has been influenced by the United States. But this is a cannon at the largest Spanish fort in the world. Built in 1774. It's called La Fortaleza de San Carlos de la Cabaña, or the Fort of St. Carlos of the cabin. And you're looking over at the Malecón. You probably have heard of the Malecón before. It's the Ocean Boulevard. It was built by Americans in 1901, and its nickname is the largest sofa in the world. Because on the opposite side, we're going to see a fort that was built in 1589. Unlike ports that you perhaps have cruised to before, where you have to take a shuttle and you go an hour in order to see anything of interest, in Cuba, you're cruising past history, 80s. And you're going to be literally walking over cobblestone streets, walking through the pages of history. Each one of these principal squares has a certain focus, function, but also a different portion of history. And the first one that you're going to walk into in Old Havana is the first on the upper left. That's Plaza de San Francisco, St. Francis Square. Its function was commerce because it's at the port, but it's named after the convent that was there. And it was built in 1730. Another one that is one of my favorites is on the lower left-hand side, Plaza Vieja, or the Old Square. On your way there, you're going to actually pass by the first aqueduct in Old Havana, built in the 1500s. That you're able to walk past history like this is amazing. And in Old Square, it is very colorful. There's wonderful works of art. There is one of my favorite coffee shops. So if you want to have an authentic café cubano, an espresso, a strong coffee, Café Escorial has a wonderful cup of coffee. And for those that like beer, there's also a brewery that's in Plaza Vieja. The third square is Plaza De La Catedral. So the Cathedral Square, and I want to tell you that it has two ways that you can be inspired here in the plaza. One is to visit the church. So it was built in 1770. It is built of limestone. So you're going to look at it and say, it's not as ornate as other architecture built during that time, which is a Baroque style. But you have to remember to carve limestone so detailed it would be very difficult. Now, I said that this was a 2-for-1 inspiration stop. And that's because just right around the corner, there is a place called Boguedita del Medio. And Boguedita del Medio was a frequent watering hole of a U.S. author that you guys are familiar with. His name is Ernest Hemingway. And at the Boguedita del Medio is where he liked to drink mojitos. And mojitos are, of course, that minty, refreshing rum cocktail that I hope that you're getting excited to try in Havana. The last and final square is Plaza De Armas. And this is probably the most influential square this year. Because guess what year Havana was founded? 1519. So this year in November, they're going to be celebrating 500 years as patience. I encourage you all, whenever you travel, to pack your patience. But in Cuba, there's no New York minute. We're on island time in Cuba, and I always like to tell the anecdote of a really good Cuban friend of mine. Her name was Islene. It has something to do with mojitos. Because I was leading tours of 20, 40, 50 people at a time, and I noticed that we had a lot of hiccups or problems along the way. And I said, Islene, I see problems on our tours, but I also see problems in Cuba, whether it's infrastructure or X, Y, and Z. And she says, oh, you're looking at this completely wrong, Heidi. There are no problems in Cuba. There are only situations. And I said, well, how do you solve your situations? And she said the solution was simple. One situation, one mojito. So if you encounter a situation in Cuba or along your cruise, I would advise to do it the Cuban way. So one situation, one mojito. And for those of you that are really good at this anecdote stuff, what do you think 2 situations calls for? 2 mojitos, I knew. So everybody asks me a myriad of questions about Cuba, whether it's politics or money or travel tips. And my first answer typically is always the word complicado, because that means complicated. And one thing about traveling to Cuba that is very complicated for us, because we're used to just swipe, 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 swipe. We have not carried more than maybe an emergency $20 bill in our billfold for a long time. And in Cuba, you've got to budget everything that you want to spend in cash. And the reason is because of the big elephant in the room, which is the embargo is still in place. So it's going to be cash-based for you guys. And there's 2 currencies on the island, and they're both called peso. So now you're understanding why it's complicado. So there are 2 currencies. One you're going to use, and it's the tourist money called CUC, and it's on the left-hand side. The other is called the Cuban Peso. They call it the CUP. P as in peso, or what I like to say is peanuts, because the value of the 2 types of pesos are very different. When you change your US dollar to Cuban convertible pesos, currently, you are going to be charged 3% just because it's a foreign transaction, but also 10% because it's a US dollar. Now, for those of you that are bringing other currencies, euros, or you're bringing Canadian dollars, you're only going to be subject to 3% because it's a foreign transaction. So that means that $1 gets you 0.87 kook. So 100 US dollars would equal 87 kook. The other money you're saying, well, am I ever going to come encounter with the Cuban peso? You may, if you have perhaps someone that wants to give you or sell you some as a souvenir, but their value is so little, you wouldn't be able to buy much with it. The CUP is what 85% of Cubans make from their government jobs. And you guys know that they make about $25 to $40 a month. But they make this gentleman on the 1 peso, which is valued 5 cents, that's Jose Marti. And he is basically the grandfather of Cuba's liberation from Spain. To the third thing that I always like to talk about, because we want you to be prepared for your authentic Cuban experience, which means the bathrooms are going to be different. Healthcare is free, education is free, but the bathroom is not. Socialism in Cuba ends at the baño. So there's going to be an attendant out of most bathrooms, and they're going to have a little basket, and they're going to expect for you to pay for entering. And that fee is a Cuban quarter, okay? And I call the Cuban quarter the pee-pee coin. And Cuban food is not spicy at all. You will find very few chilies. You will never see an habanero on their menu, nor jalapenos. But it is flavorful. Many of the flavors are going to be onions, green peppers, garlic, citrus. And these are some things that you're going to see on your menus. Whether you're taking a tour with Carnival, which is 100% compliant with the people-to-people regulations in Cuba, or if you're going on an independent tour, you will see these dishes. Now, the first thing that you're saying to yourself is, I do not see a Cuban sandwich. And the reason is because the best Cuban sandwiches are not in Cuba. They are actually in one of two places, both of which are in Florida, in Cuba. However, I would suggest that you try the top 2 dishes there. The one on the left is roasted pork. Pork is what they have for birthdays, the end of the year, weddings, any celebration. And it is succulent. I mean, fall off the bone. It's glorious. Now, with pork or chicken or fish or whatever meat product that you're having, you're going to have the national side dish of Cuba, which is beans and rice and beans, or you got it, beans and rice. So also, what are you going to have for side dishes other than rice and beans? Typically root vegetables, yuca, taro, sweet potato. You're not going to find French fries or mashed potatoes like you would in the States, but different type of starch that fill the cracks. My favorite dish is the next one, Ropa Vieja. And Ropa Vieja is old clothes. That's what the translation is. And you say, no way, why would I want to eat anything that's old clothes? Well, I have a couple pairs of jeans that have the frayed edges at the bottom. Well, those frayed edges are basically why the dish got this name. So old clothes, they have maybe some threads to them. And so this is stewed beef. So it's not a quality of beef that you'd want to have a filet mignon, but once you stew it and you shred it and then you saute it with garlic, onions, green peppers, and some tomato paste, it is divine. And these are 2 that I would highly recommend. Flan is a caramelized custard, very light, and what every Cuban would want to have when they're feeling, oh, I just need some comfort food. Mom, please make me natilla, which is the dessert on the right-hand side. It's like a pudding, and it'll take on whatever flavor that the chef wants, whether it's vanilla or whether it's coconut. Now, there's 60,000 of these old relics in Cuba, and they may look original, but they are not 100% original because they are what I would say Cubanized, which maybe they have a Russialata or Moscovich engine underneath the hood. Perhaps there's Cuban ingenuity, maybe some duct tape that are holding them together, but they are so fun to ride in. Ponce de Leon missed the mark by not finding the Fountain of Youth in Old Havana. So if you hire a car, it's going to be for the rate of the trip, not per person, and you should know that it's polite to tip your drivers or your bartenders or your wait staff 10%, okay? So always negotiate before you get in. If you see me with this hat on and you have a question that wasn't addressed here, come up to me, say hola, hola, que bola. So know that I'm a writer. I have penned 3 books, and if you're interested in learning more about Cuba before you get there, I have books that are signed for you. They include some recipes from Cuba for the natilla, the dirty rice, as well as what you need for therapy in Cuba, the mojito,